Hey guys, how's it going? This is Nate English from EnglishEndurance.com, and I was just going to do a pre-race kind of coaching session, just going through my thoughts on the Berkeley Hills Road Race in advance of it happening this weekend. This is scheduled to happen at 8 on Wednesday. Today's Wednesday at 8 when I'm filming this, obviously, and I'm just going to wait a few minutes until people get a chance to show up and join this little live session, and I'll post this up afterwards, so whatever notes and comments I have and any questions that I might answer, if people post questions, will be available after this. And it's kind of fun and outside of my comfort zone because it's not my normal thing to want to be in front of a bunch of people without being able to edit myself. Obviously, the other videos that I produce, I can film and then experiment for me. But anyway, yeah, I'll just chill out for a few minutes to give people a chance to sign on. And while I'm doing that, I'm just opening up this stream so I can see when people are commenting on this and answer any questions that people might have. Hey, how's it going? So I'm gonna start in just a minute and just offer some of my thoughts going into the Berkeley Hills Road Race, and go ahead and comment if you have any questions or things that you wanted me to talk about. I have some notes that I was going to go over, and definitely comment also if there's any technical difficulties. I think things should be set up pretty well because I just have like my phone and a lav mic that hopefully is working well for you. I tested it earlier, but in any case, I'll just wait a couple minutes before I start offering whatever thoughts I have and answering any questions that people might have. So hold on for just a minute and I'll start when there's maybe a few more people that have had a chance to join. So right now we're a few days out from the road race. This year it's happening on a Saturday. So hi Amy. So right now we're a few days out from the road race, and at this point any fitness that you have is fully intact, and nothing that you do training wise in the next few days will have any impact on your fitness, like fundamentally, for Saturday's race. So at this point in the game, whatever preparation you're doing is mostly having an influence on how recovered you are, how much glycogen you have, how hydrated you are, and how fresh you feel on the day of the race. So I would definitely not be thinking about like training. Like some people, if it's their first race or if they're newer to it, sometimes think about like what kind of workout they should be doing, but I would not be doing any workouts in the last 2 or 3 days before any kind of challenging race like this. The biggest thing you can do to try to be prepared for a race, let's say that's happening on Saturday, like the Berkeley Hills Road Race, is to have a couple days that are off or easy, and depending on what has happened in the last few days and how fresh you're feeling and what kind of training you've been doing, and whether or not Berkeley Hills is like a goal race for you, or it's maybe building towards later season goals, like maybe you're trying to get ready for some races down the line, like maybe you're getting ready for nationals in the middle of the summertime or something like that. Or if you're a crit racer and you're just doing it to help your team out and you're just trying to get a good endurance session in, maybe it doesn't matter a ton to get a ton of recovery, and you can just kind of train through it with a few easy endurance rides the next couple of days. But if you were trying to be as fresh as possible and have some sort of like a mini peak for a race that's happening on Saturday, let's say, I would think about either doing an easy ride or an off day 2 days out from the race. So let's say Wednesday you maybe did a workout, maybe you did a medium ride, or you did a few intervals or something like that. Thursday I would probably consider taking it completely off, or just going for a pretty easy spin and just moving your legs around for, let's say, an hour or maybe an hour and a half at the most. very high level athletes might do more than that, but for most people who have a job and maybe only train 10 hours a week or something like that, a couple hours is like more than enough. Probably 1 to 1.5 hours is perfect. On Friday, I would think about doing the same kind of thing, just, an hour to an hour and a half, pretty easy. And I would do a little bit of intensity. A lot of times I would think about doing a progressive warm up for the first 30 to 45 minutes of the ride, and then maybe do a little bit of tempo or threshold type riding just for a few minutes so that your heart rate and breathing get pretty elevated, so your aerobic system feels like it's working at a relatively high level and you're like ready to go hard. But I wouldn't settle into doing a really hard effort. You just want to like make sure you're pretty warmed up and ready to go. After your aerobic system is pretty warmed up and you probably have a good sweat going and you feel pretty loose, I might do maybe a few sprints or just some like 20 to 30 second accelerations at a power that's like well above your threshold, but wouldn't necessarily qualify as like an all-out effort. Sometimes it does feel good to do 1 or 2 like pretty all-out efforts that are short the day before a race. That's something that I would experiment with and see how it feels for different races, over time. But if I was going to hypothesize like the ideal scenario, I might think you warm up pretty well, you do a couple of short little like 2 or 3 minute efforts that are high tempo or threshold type of riding, and then do 2 or 3 either 10, 12 second sprints at 90% effort, or like 20 to 30 second accelerations at like 80% effort, where it's like kind of hard and you start to feel it, but you're not like really hurting. And then both of those rides, even though they're not very intense, you should be sure to try to recover well afterwards and, eat enough calories in general, but especially get some good carbohydrate intake, get plenty of fluid, especially if it's warm out as you're doing your last few rides before the race. Get some electrolytes so that you can absorb that fluid and retain it much better, and get a good bit of protein. Pretty much anytime you're training, I would go ahead and take in 20 to 25 grams of protein after most any exercise session that you do, and try to get a little bit of protein with each of your meals. You don't need to go crazy and go out of your way to like add protein powder to everything or have meat or some high protein thing at every meal, but I would just avoid having like only carbs. So like, I don't know, if you just had like a bunch of rice or something like that, that would provide good fuel, but it wouldn't allow you to recover and build new enzymes to help make you fitter. So, Thursday, Friday, pretty easy. On Saturday, actually, real quick, going back to Friday, aside from the ride that you might do to help your body be prepared, I would also think about getting your stuff ready so that when you go to bed on Friday night, you have, your kit, your helmet, your sunglasses, and they're all just ready to go. Maybe sunscreen, any food that you're going to take for the ride, but also food that you might take for right afterwards, because your recovery after any hard workout or race has a huge impact on your long-term progress. And if you, can recover just a little bit better every time you race or go do a hard workout, even if you just get 2% more out of it compounded over time, that makes a big difference. So, plan your recovery ahead of time. So many people show up to races and they're ready to race, but then they aren't thinking, what happens after the race. And if anything, that's like one of the first things that I'm thinking about is how to recover from whatever session it is that I'm doing. And by recover, I don't mean just take the next day off or easy. I mean, hydrate and get some protein and get some carbohydrates in to your body within the first 30 to 60 minutes after you're done with that workout or race. So that'll make a big difference, down the line. I would, plan the logistics, check in with your carpool buddy, or, check to see how long the drive time is to the race start, or if you're going to ride there, like how long you anticipate that will take. And if you have a backpack while you're riding, like a buddy that maybe you can stash your stuff in their car. And then I would think about what kind of strategy you want to have going into the race, and, how you imagine the race might unfold given your field and who's going to be racing and how they might tend to race that or approach that race. So think about your strengths and weaknesses and think about how to try to maximize your strengths and kind of mitigate whatever weaknesses that you have, so you can hopefully not get dropped when it's challenging for you, but you can get through the rough times, and then hopefully take advantage of your strengths when they're going to help you out. And then a lot of times I would encourage people to, kind of anticipate and visualize the race. Like visualization exercises can be very helpful. It's very well documented for a lot of different things, that visualizing the experience that you're going to have and anticipating the feelings and thoughts and sensations that you will have during that experience can help you to perform better when the experience is actually happening. So especially if you live in the East Bay, you could remember riding the course and anticipate like how hard it's going to feel to you at different moments, and then imagine yourself like getting through that. Imagine like the tactics and how you will respond to those situations, and also maybe imagine like how what you might do if there's an unexpected event that happens during the race. Like if somebody crashes in front of you and maybe you have to stop and then chase to catch back on or something like that. Sometimes foreseeing some of the bad things that could happen makes it easier when they do, so then you can respond and not get flustered in the moment. And then on Saturday, just, wake up, get your stuff packed, and get there in a reasonable amount of time. I would encourage people not to arrive too early, because then you're just sitting around and you're probably getting cold and you're like kind of bored, and then you might even like get drowsy by the time the race starts. Also, don't get there too late. Then you'll be in a rush and you'll probably forget something. But usually, maybe it takes 10 or 15 minutes at the most to get your bike off your car and go pick up your number and pin your number. And then if you just ride around for 20 minutes, you should be warmed up and ready to line up, 5 to 10 minutes before your race starts. So I would, generally think that like 40 to 50 minutes is a pretty ideal sweet spot for a lot of people. But, maybe you need a little bit more or less time. This particular race happens at a time of year that it's usually warmer, so you probably don't need as much of a warm up. But when it's cold, leave more time for warm up. When it's warm, you often won't need quite as much time to warm up. But I'm just checking to see if there's some questions that people have left me. But as far as nutrition goes on race day, I wouldn't be worried that much about what your breakfast is. Don't overthink it. Don't overdo it. Don't eat a lot because you think that race is going to be hard. Eat whatever you think is going to help you feel good the day of the race. Eat whatever your normal thing is. Don't change it up a bunch. If anything, I would eat light right before a race, because when the race starts early in the morning, and whatever muscle glycogen you have stored up at that moment in time is going to be determined by how well you recovered from previous training sessions, and not by what you eat that morning. If anything, if you eat a lot that morning, you're going to maybe feel a little bit heavier, and you are more likely to have a rise in blood sugar and then a rise in blood insulin that helps your body to pack away the blood sugar that you have. And then maybe at the time the race is starting, you aren't feeling super ready to go because your hormones are totally in the opposite state that you would want them in order to perform well. So if anything, I would tend to eat light and maybe have a coffee and a couple of eggs or something like that, or maybe a small bowl of oatmeal. But I would keep it comfortable. Don't change it too much from whatever your normal routine is. And think about what your normal routine is for when you feel good, not what you think you want to do for a really big ride, because sometimes people overthink it and they overeat the morning of a big ride. Do what's going to help you feel good. And definitely, reminder, Thursday night after your ride, Friday throughout the day, those are the times that you can have a big impact on your glycogen stores on Saturday. So your hydration and your fuel available for racing is kind of set Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And Saturday morning, the day of the race, doesn't really matter that much. You should just, be comfortable going to the race. And along the lines of recovering, right now it's Wednesday when I'm filming this, and how well you sleep, tonight and tomorrow night matters a good bit. Sleep is always really key for recovery, so definitely keep that in mind, just long-term in your athletic life. If you can sleep regularly and have good sleep hygiene and have good high quality sleep, even if you're only sleeping a little bit less than you ideally would want, but it's very consistent and it's very high quality, that will have a big impact on your long-term progress. But oftentimes people that are a little bit anxious before a race, they might, not sleep well that night. Don't worry about it. If that happens, that's, whatever, that's not a big deal. If it happens, it's fine. If it doesn't happen, great. But, 2 nights out, Wednesday night and Thursday night, try to have a good night's sleep and try to, take care of your body in advance of the stressful situation that, you might experience on Saturday when you're racing. And then just looking at my notes real quick. Yeah, and along the general topic of preparation, I kind of went over this at the start. Take it easy the next couple of days, Thursday and Friday, getting ready for a Saturday race, but don't go too easy. Like, don't take 2 days off unless you really have to because of work or family things. Usually, like, just some light sessions are ideal. So think of like the last time you took a vacation, or maybe for some reason you were just really busy at work and you had several days completely off. Usually your first couple rides back, you often feel kind of tired and flat. And then maybe like the third or the fourth day back after a long break, you feel better. So it's the same kind of thing racing. So like I had said before, tomorrow, Thursday, I might take it off, or I might do just like an easy aerobic, endurance session that's like an hour to an hour and a half long. And then Friday, the same thing, take it pretty chill, but maybe do a couple of moderate efforts just so you feel like warmed up and ready to go. Not tired, but refreshed. And at the end of the ride, hopefully you feel like you're, ready to go hard. And then as far as, so getting to like the actual race, the event, and getting past the preparation, I would go into any race thinking ahead what you think your strengths are and where you think you would have the biggest advantage and what you think your weaknesses are, and try to play to your strengths and try to nudge the field in such a way that it hopefully sets up a scenario that favors you or your team, and try to limit the chance that you're going to have difficulty because the race scenario doesn't suit you very well. So, pay attention to your strengths, try to maximize those, or the strengths of your team, and go in with some sort of strategy. Like you're going to, wait for the last lap and try to ride hard on the hills to drop people because you're a strong climber, and hopefully you're in the front group at the end. Or maybe you want to go for the breakaway, because at this course you can definitely see breakaways go and stay away. If you look at the course, I have a pre-ride video that you can see separately from this one. But if you look at the course, like it seems like if you ride it, you kind of think like, oh, there's a few hills on the backside of the course. After San Pablo Dam Road, you descend and then it's flat for a minute, and then there's some rollers, and there's actually like a decent bit of climbing there. And then you ride around and you kind of feel like it's flat for the whole like the second third of the loop, and then you feel like it's hilly at the end. But really, the whole course is rolling, and the only truly flat section, or like what I would regard as a really flat section, is San Pablo Dam Road, and even that's like a false flat kind of rolling uphill. But once you get down to the far side of the course, like opposite the start area, it's really a false flat uphill all the way around. So like I'm just looking at the last time that I did this race in the Pro and 2 field. It was, it's a little bit faster maybe than some of the other fields, but we averaged 23.5 miles per hour. But just looking at some little stretch of road, or sorry, little stretch in the middle of the race, like pretty much every time we went through the far side of the course, it looks like we were well below that. We were riding more like 20 miles an hour through what appears to be a flat section of road. So, it's hard, it wears on everyone, and don't, feel bad or overthink it if you are getting tired and feeling uncomfortable for most of the course. Like this course is made to feel uncomfortable most of the way around. So, everyone's in the same boat. Always do what you can to save energy and be as efficient as possible. You might even think about it as far as like you could think of trying to be lazy in the race. Try to get a draft as much as possible. Try to stay steadier on the climbs unless you're responding to a move or you're attacking or something like that. But as much as possible, if you can keep it steady and not do a lot of little accelerations, you can save a lot of energy, because every time you're going well above your threshold, you're burning all glycogen, or for the most part, it's mostly glycogen, and that hurts you a lot later on. So the more you can keep it smooth and steady and try to relax, the better. So always, look for the key moments in the race when you really have to do something. And, whenever something is happening that you really have to like get across the gap to the break or, not get dropped, do what you need to do. But, whenever you're doing something, always do it with the least amount of energy possible. Anyway, so, be very efficient, be patient. It's a long race. It's very dynamic. The field can break apart and come back together and then break apart again. And even if there's a breakaway, let's say, of a handful of riders and they have a minute gap on the field on the last lap, a really strong rider back in the field can bridge across that gap if they time it right and the brake is tired from being out there in the wind all day. So it's a very dynamic race. You can definitely see breakaways go, maybe a group, bridges up partway through the race. I've seen that happen and participated in that kind of race, and it's like really fun. But it, until you're getting to the last half a lap, like there's a lot that can happen that will influence how things go. And then look for every descent to take in some food and water. There's several interspersed throughout the course, but because it is such a hard race, make sure you're taking care of your body and relaxing as much as possible. And generally, most people, 200 to 300 calories per hour is going to be good. And generally, like about a bottle per hour is going to be good for a race like this. But, again, stay comfortable. Don't change it up too much from what you would normally do for a hard ride or a long ride. Do whatever is going to help you feel comfortable and do your best. And, don't overthink it just because it's a race. Always, do what works well for you in training. And when you're in training, experiment then. Consider trying out different nutritional strategies, different hydration strategies in training so that you know on race day what you're going to want to do and what's going to help you feel the best on race day. Don't change it up and do something completely different on race day. Yeah, I think those are some of my kind of main overall thoughts. If you are taking in gels or anything else that has caffeine in it, I would think about doing that, throughout the race or maybe like past the halfway point of the race. But if you're going to take in gels like that have caffeine, it takes a little bit of time to get into your system, so I wouldn't worry about it on the last 20 minutes of a race. Likewise, if you're starting to feel tired and you've been taking care of your body throughout the race and you've been eating and drinking and taking in food and gels or whatever it is that you're taking in, if you're stressed and it's really difficult to get anything in on the last half a lap, which it usually is because it's pretty hilly and it's very dynamic on the last lap, don't worry about it, because anything that you take in at that point in time is not going to have a huge impact on your fuel availability. Definitely there's some research to suggest that drinking sweet fluids, like some sort of drink mix, will improve your performance whether or not you actually consume it. So if you have drink mix, I would definitely continue to drink that. That usually just takes 2 seconds to do. But as far as opening up a bar and trying to eat that, or even opening up a gel and consuming that in the last half a lap, if you can do that, go for it if that's going to feel good to you. But don't get flustered or panicked because you can't, because there's a lot going on in the race. I've seen that happen where people are getting annoyed or stressed about things that might not really matter in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, and then I think those are kind of my main notes for just general strategy and taking care of yourself. In general, I would anticipate this race to either be early to mid-race breakaway that includes a handful of riders, anywhere from 3 to 6 riders, depending on the size of the field. So if the field has 20 riders in it and there's 3 or 4 riders that get off the front, I could see that break, forming and winning the race if it has the right motivated and strong riders in it and it has the right teams represented. If there's a team that knows what they're doing and they're strong enough to chase back a break that they're not in, I wouldn't worry about the breakaway. But once it gets past a critical mass of 3 or 4 or 5 riders and it has all the main teams represented and it has a handful of strong riders, then I would start to be interested in possibly being in that breakaway. If I'm not in that breakaway, I would maybe look for chances to bridge across to it later. Or even if maybe the breakaway of 5 riders has a minute gap on the last lap, I'm not going to be too optimistic that I'll be able to get across that gap, even if I am really strong. And I'm just using a kind of the royal we type of thing. So if you're a really strong rider and you miss the break and they have a minute gap on the field, don't worry about it, because that breakaway of 5 riders, we'll call it, it's going to explode on the last lap. And if you bide your time and wait until Mama Bear on the far side of the course, and then you attack and get away from the field, you can probably pass three or four, like you might be able to pass 3 or 4 of the riders in the break and finish on the podium, even if there was a minute gap at the end of the 4th lap going into the 5th lap, or whatever the last lap is for your field. So, be patient, be efficient, even if you feel like you're out of contention for the win or the result that you might want. But just the nature of the course, you can definitely, break away from the field that you're in, or the group that you're in, and hopefully finish like relatively high up, even if you're not in the breakaway. If it's not a breakaway, I would definitely be 100% sure that it's going to be a race of attrition. And even if the field mostly stays together and there's like a few break attempts and people get up the road, but then they get brought back, at the end of the race, whoever is left in the field and hasn't been dropped, if it's 5 riders or 10 riders, like that, whatever's left of the field is going to explode going over the hills on the last lap. So if there's 10 riders together with 10K to go, that group is probably going to split up and have like a 3 or 4 minute spread from like the first to the last rider at the finish line. So, be ready for a hard last lap and, have fun with it. And if you're trying to do well, that's great. Like, try to be aggressive and, push your advantage when you can. If you're just trying to suffer through it, get as much of a draft as you can and just hold on as long as you can. And that's really can be rewarding, because if you're very smart and efficient about it, you might be able to finish higher up than you anticipate if you're just, very smart and you take care of your body and you stay hydrated throughout the race. I've definitely seen a lot of riders do a lot of work early in the race that ends up hurting them later, and they get dropped when, they might have been able to finish, in the second group on the road, if they had, just been a little bit more patient and bided their time a little bit more. And then one of my recent conversations was with somebody who was thinking that, they're more of a climber, and they were thinking about when they might want to attack if they're feeling good on the last lap. And there's a lot of ways that you could try to win this race. If you are a good climber and a good time trialist, you might want to attack and drop people on the first climb. There's like 3 or 4 little climbs over the last 10K, we'll call it. You might, and you'll see the course. I mean, it's obvious what's happening. But you might want to attack early and get a gap and then try to ride away from people. But that really takes a ton of commitment and a really good ability to suffer. So you really need to be committed to a hard effort and having just like a really stubborn attitude. More likely, I would look for an opportunity to surprise people on the rollers leading into the last climb. That's actually how I won that race several years ago. Basically, there was a group of like 5 or 6 people still, and just that last little bump before you descend and then go into the finishing climb, it looked like everyone was kind of waiting around and looking at each other. And in retrospect, I don't know that it was necessarily the best move, but it was a surprising move, and I attacked over that rise and got a gap, and then kept that gap down the descent and was able to stay away from the group that I was in going up the last climb. And that was super fun, it was super rewarding, and it was 100% the kind of way that I would want to win a race, because it was like the hardest way possible probably at that moment in time. But the element of surprise is really effective, especially if people are tired and they're not thinking straight and they're kind of demotivated because they just feel miserable at that point in time. So you probably feel miserable too, but just recognize that that's your body's way of giving you feedback, and it's not pain, it's not like you're going to die, like your body is fine, but you're just getting fatigued and not able to perform as well as you could when you're fresh. Just be sensitive to how your body's doing and be aware of like what you are capable of. But within that context, just embrace it and go for it. I think a lot of people kind of get inside their own head when they feel like they're suffering and it's like the race is really hard, and they kind of let things happen that they might be able to act upon if they were thinking straight. But generally, if you're a climber, I would probably just wait for the last climb and try to outclimb people, either with a really powerful attack from like midway up where it starts to get steeper and people have lost their momentum and their legs start to load up 2 minutes into the last climb. Or if you are a decent sprinter, try to hold on, get a draft as much as possible and see if you can't out sprint people on the last little bit. The last climb is a few minutes long. It's painful. Your legs will hate you at the end of it. But I've seen races where there's a group that stays mostly together and then there's a sprint finish at the end. So that can be a fun way to win. But, really strong riders who are savvy and willing to suffer and can, capitalize on a moment of surprise, sometimes will go from pretty far out. So I've been in that situation a few times where there were attacks and a chasing situation from like the far side of the course. So the whole like last 30 minutes of the race was just like one rider 20 seconds ahead of another rider who was chasing them, who was 30 seconds ahead of what was left of the breakaway. So it can be really dynamic like that, but you really have to be willing to suffer. Usually I would think it's a safer bet for most people to wait till the last climb to sort things out. But yeah, so to summarize, take care of your body, be ready for a race of attrition, look for a breakaway, and look for that critical mass, look for the right teams to be represented. And any team that has more than a few riders in it should try to get somebody in the breakaway if they have any say about it. But it's really dynamic, so don't go crazy and just like follow every move thinking that a breakaway is going to be successful. As far as when that breakaway is likely to get established, I'm just looking at a map real quick. I would look at the first few K of the race on San Pablo Dam Road. Not at the end, right before the descent, because then the descent is really fast and whoever's in the group can easily just like catch up to, the three riders that are off the front. But if they get off like a few minutes before that happens and then going down the descent, they have like a 20 or a 30-second gap, they can keep that and push their advantage throughout the rest of the course. But if a break doesn't go there, I would look for something to happen on the far side of the course where it's kind of that false flat uphill, and especially after you get off of Alhambra Valley Road, I think it is. No, after you... Yeah, Alhambra Valley. So Alhambra Valley, you can kind of see up the road a little bit. It's not that wide. It's easy to block there. So if there is a break, teams can kind of block for their teammates up the road. But there's a chance that people could attack there. I wouldn't assume that that's where the break would go, but it could happen. I mean, anything could happen. Racing is dynamic. That's why it's fun. But I would maybe look for an attack on Bear Creek Road where it's a little bit twistier, it's a little bit more uphill, or on the climbs. And if there isn't a break already established at the end of the first lap and you're going through the finish area, a lot of times people will try to attack over that climb because it's the biggest climb. And you really want to be heads up and stay in the frontmost group that you can. But you shouldn't murder yourself to be in the front group if the gaps are really small, because after the finishing climb, there's like a little dip and then it goes up for, 2 minutes. And then there's a big, fast, long descent back to the start area. So that long descent gives groups an ability to kind of regroup into one larger field again. So, be very heads up and always try to be in the frontmost group that you can without killing yourself. But don't, unless it's like the last lap, it's one to go, don't kill yourself to be in the front group if things are starting to break up. I mean, you run the risk that you might miss out on a move, but a lot of times people will murder themselves to be in contention and then it doesn't matter later. And then they're too tired when things actually happen that matter later in the race. So use your best judgment, but a lot of times, be very diligent, but just chill out a little bit so you can save your energy for later. But I haven't noticed anyone offering any questions on the feed here, because this is my first time doing this and it's whatever. We'll see how this goes in the future. But definitely, thanks for those of you that showed up to watch this. And if you're watching a replay of this, I really hope that you get something out of it. I think in the future, I'll probably try to create more structure so that it's more compact and isn't as long. But for anyone that was watching or watches this afterward, I hope that it's useful to you. And please, feel free to reach out in the future if you want me to go over a particular race course or make a pre-ride video like I did for this race. But yeah, I think that's gonna be it for tonight, and I'll see you the next time you watch one of these. Take care. Bye.